Good evening. Not long ago, I was let go from my job from a company I'll call MJ. I'm not going to use their names because I don't want to get sued for this video for slander. So I'm not going to mention any names. I'm only going to use abbreviations and I'm only going to use people's initials. Well, this happened a few days after my birthday when a few people who I thought were my friends and I hope still are took me out to a club called Upper Saigon. Well, nonetheless, during my hiatus, I watched the movie Dead Poets Society. I'm employed again, by the way. Dead Poets Society is a story about an English teacher in a school in Vermont back in the 50s named Dean Keating, who teaches poetry to his students. He has an unorthodox method. He has them go out and march around. He has them question authority, thinking outside the box. His students loved him. He was very popular. But his students, living the kind of repressive lifestyle they lived, wanted to rebel a little, and they formed this group called the Dead Poet Society. It was a secret group. They would all meet up surreptitiously in the middle of the night and read poems. One of the members of the Dead Poet Society had an overbearing father who pushed him too hard, expected him to do the impossible. He wound up committing suicide, spoiler alert. And after the kid took his own life, everybody was crushed. They were all grief stricken. And naturally, the school was looking for a scapegoat to pin that kid's suicide on. So Dean Keaton got nominated and he was let go from his job. I also watched the movie Philadelphia with Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks in that movie plays a gay attorney who gets fired when they find out that he has AIDS. He concealed his condition, but they deduced that he had AIDS. He was sabotaged, of course. They did that to cover their own tracks so that it wouldn't look like they discriminated against him. Well, he filed a discrimination suit against the company. Denzel Washington plays Beckett's lawyer. What happened was he had an important case going on, and while he was in the hospital being treated for AIDS, one of the paralegals couldn't find the file on the case. Then he said, "Okay, check my computer, it's not there." And they looked on his computer, it wasn't there. So while he was in the middle of emergency treatment, he had to run to the law firm and go retrieve the file, which turned out to be in archives. Somebody basically set him up, and then he was called into a meeting and he was let go from his job because they tried to make him look incompetent. Well, ironically, he had just won a big lawsuit for that firm earlier, so that's why it didn't make any sense. That's when he knew that he was being forced out from his job. Something similar happened to me. The company I'll refer to as MJ tried to say that I was a bad teacher, that I wasn't good at my job, which is anything but true. If it was true, I wouldn't have landed the job where I am now. I applied for a company that has a learning center in Bien Hoa. There were about 30 candidates for the job, and I was the one selected because they said I was the most qualified. So that's a bunch of baloney when they said I wasn't a good teacher. To make a long story short, last fall I worked at a secondary school called NHT during the week and another school called LTT on Saturdays. I loved working at LTT, by the way. They were high school kids, they were great kids, they were really smart, and they were a lot of fun. I didn't have any problems with them there. Some of them didn't go to class. Well, and I don't blame them because the stuff I was teaching them, they were way too smart for. I was teaching them stuff like colors, uh, clothing, uh, jobs, stuff that I would have been teaching first and second graders. And these were sophomores and juniors in high school. I don't blame them for not wanting to go to school and have to learn stuff they already know, especially on a Saturday. So nobody can fault them for that. They're kids. They all want to unwind and kick back and chill on Saturdays. Who can blame them? I had problems at NHT school though because it was run like a business. The kids were monsters. There wasn't any discipline or any kind of reprisals. The kids were bouncing off the walls all the time. Well, for one thing, the classes were too big. There were over 50 kids in each class. The sixth graders were a handful. So were the seventh graders, the lower functioning ones. But worst of all, I had problems with a ninth grade class. In particular, there was some little prickwad in my class who spoke great English, didn't ever want to work. He was so lazy, he was always a cut up, a clown, and he thought he was too cool for school. I had to tell him to leave the class half the time because he was too much of a distraction. He wasn't doing me any good. I've been doing this job long enough to figure out that all the slackers and cut ups like to sit in the back of the class and hang out. So what I do is I don't let anybody sit in the back row anymore. I separate all the slackers and I put them next to the top performers to bring them up to par. I had my students doing a lot of writing. Not all the time, just some writing. I always have them write. I did that in Thailand. I did that at LTT. I did that at NHT. It wasn't a problem. Well, for some reason, this other school that I taught at, I actually took the assignment of a Canadian friend. I'll call him Toronto because they squeezed him out too. He's from Toronto. I'm not going to mention any names. Toronto and I switched assignments. He took my job at NHT school. I took his job at TP school where I was let go. Well, the first week I was there, I was late for class. I'll take the hit for that one. What happened was the night before, I went out to dinner and hung out with a friend of mine from Ireland who I may never see again. It was his last night in Vietnam. I wanted to see him one last time before saying goodbye. And it was late. I overslept. I missed breakfast and I brought food in the classroom. I'll admit that that was unprofessional and that was irresponsible for me. I never said I was a saint. But the school took offense to it. They made a big deal out of it, complained about me, and I already had one strike against me. The second time, what happened was I went to the wrong class because the geniuses in charge kept changing the schedule every week. I didn't have a regular set schedule with TP school like I did at NHT and LTT. Well, I would therefore write down all my classes in my little notepad. It just so happens I went to the class that I had the day before. I couldn't find the right class. I tried to go online on my smartphone, but they had a bad Wi Fi signal because this is Vietnam. You can only get 3G Wi Fi. I tried calling somebody back at MJ, getting a hold of somebody, asking them which class I'm at. Nobody could answer the phone. And then I started freaking out. I started panicking. I was going frantic because I couldn't find the class. And of course, me having Asperger's, I was starting to have an anxiety attack. But it wouldn't do any good to explain to anybody here in Vietnam because for most people, this is just completely uncharted territory. But nonetheless, one of the aides who was trying to sabotage me told MJ that I was being hostile and aggressive and lashing out at all the teachers and that I was losing face. Apparently, that's a major faux pas in Asian cultures. I wasn't losing face. I wasn't angry. I was going frantic. And this same teacher also had me teach another lesson of hers because she couldn't be bothered to teach it. She was making up all kinds of nonsense about me the whole time, trying to get the students to complain about me that I was speaking too fast, that I was being hostile, and that I was being nasty, which is anything but true, except maybe me speaking a little fast. Okay. I nonetheless tried to slow down because they were lower functioning kids. There are a lot of politics in the school system in Asia. A lot of the schools are run by businesses, like businesses. And some of the teachers, many of them are resentful towards foreign teachers because we get paid 3 times more than they do, even though they might have 3 times more experience. It was a power trip, is what it was. And then, of course, I was warned about that. TA said she was going to go back there and try to smooth things over. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. I don't believe her, but the best she did was buy me a little more time because I was called into a meeting and said that this is I'm on my last leg with them, that they don't have any other place to put me. Ironically, that was the day of the Christmas party, the same day some other knucklehead I'll call MP got blind drunk at the Christmas party and made a fool of himself, tried to start fights with a few people. He basically did some borderline unethical and even borderline illegal things. He was grabbed a guy by the back of his neck. He also went up to one of the girls and said that her ass was fat and that she should hit the exercise bike. I talked to TA about it and I said, if MP acted that way in the United States as a company party, his butt would have been canned the next day. It wouldn't even be a topic for debate. He probably would have been sued for sexual harassment either. But of course, they gave him a slap on the wrist for that. That was when the mask came off, and it became clear to me that MJ doesn't really care too much about their teachers, but about the contracts. It's like that with a lot of companies in this part of the world, sadly. Well, anyways, going back to the movie Philadelphia and the movie Dead Poet Society, I ascertained that what happened was the school probably threatened to cancel their contract with MJ if they didn't fire me. And sure enough, my hypothesis was right. One of the managers at MJ, I'll call NN, was able to confirm that to me. The point is, I wasn't a bad teacher. I never was. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. This happens to people in all facets of life. It's called office politics. Just because somebody gets let go from their job, that doesn't mean that they're bad, that they're incompetent, or that they're in over their head. Bill Belichick used to be the coach for the Cleveland Browns many years ago. He was fired from them. They weren't winning. Whatever the rhyme or reason, they didn't release it to the public. But that doesn't mean he's a bad coach. Bill Belichick has now won more Super Bowls than any other coach in NFL history, including Vince Lombardi. That's why they talked about changing the name of the Lombardi Trophy to the Belichick Trophy. He took the New England Patriots to the Super Bowl 7 times, and they won 5 times. But Bill Belichick was still squeezed out of his job. My situation actually kind of reminds me of some stuff that happens in the NBA. I never understood why Isaiah Thomas never played on the Dream Team. I used to watch the NBA religiously in the early 90s. Well, the reason why the first time is because Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen went to the IOC and threatened not to play for the Dream Team if Isaiah Thomas was on there. They basically kiboshed any possibility of Thomas playing on the Dream Team because Jordan and Pippen didn't like him. And they didn't want to let say Isaiah Thomas on there because Michael Jordan was the most popular player in the NBA, and of course the NBA was thinking about the money. The same thing happened the when LeBron James played for the Cleveland Cavaliers the first time. Being the overpaid prick that he was at the time, he threatened to leave the team if they didn't fire the coach for the Cavaliers. He thought it was his place to determine who the HR people, the general manager, should hire. And of course, the owner and the general manager, thinking about all the money, fired the coach because they knew that if they released LeBron James, that the fans wouldn't be happy. And then, of course, LeBron James pulled a jerk move by making some media circus about who he was going to play with next, and then he went to go play for the Miami Heat. So the Cleveland Cavaliers were up a creek without a paddle. That all because LeBron James had to have it his way. I remember also the year the Stros went to the World Series. I'm a big Astros fan. I'm from Houston. Craig Biggio and Jeff Bagwell, they were on the down slope of their career. They were in their twilight years. Well, I couldn't understand why the Stros fired Phil Garner not long after that. They said because the Stros weren't winning, but the real reason why they fired Phil Garner, who took them to their only World Series, was because Jeff Bagwell and Craig Biggio were having personality conflicts with Garner. They didn't like Garner, and of course, the owners aren't going to release their two star players, especially when they're about to retire. So the manager was the one who got axed. That's what happened with me. MJ was thinking about the money, they were thinking about the contract, and not the teachers. What was another example I was trying to think of? Oh, that's why a lot of NBA superstars and other professional sports superstars have gone to play for other teams. The reason why Shaquille O'Neal left the Lakers to go play for the Miami Heat is because he and Kobe Bryant weren't getting along. Of course, because Shaquille O'Neal was already past his prime and more or less on the downside of his career. They weren't going to renew his contract, so he signed with the Miami Heat. Either that or they traded him. I don't remember the whole story. But of course, they were going to keep their star player on there, which was Kobe Bryant at the time. They're not going to keep the over the hill veteran like Shaquille O'Neal. That's the same reason why Dwight Howard left the Rockets. He and James Harden weren't getting along. There was some friction between them. So, of course, James Harden, being the star player, was the one who got to stay, and that's why Dwight Howard went to play for the Atlanta Hawks. That's probably why Dennis Rodman played for so many teams. That's why he left the Pistons. They didn't want to deal with his crap anymore, so he went to go play for other teams. Now, everybody acted all of a sudden like Dennis Rodman all of a sudden became a troublemaker once he went to go play for the Spurs or the Bulls, but he wasn't. Dennis Rodman was always a troublemaker. The Pistons were called the Bad Boys. It's just that nobody ever noticed because he was playing around Isaiah Thomas, who is one of the dirtiest players ever, ranked the dirtiest player, one of the dirtiest players ever, and Bill Laimbeer. They were all dirty players. So Dennis Rodman had more places to hide. But yes, that doesn't mean I'm a bad teacher. I got a much better job now. And ironically, today, when I picked up my new motorbike, the Australian guy who rented it to me, he used to be a teacher. He used to work for MJ, and he also worked for the company I'm with now. I asked him which did he like better, and he said, "Oh, this one by far easily puts MJ to shame." So I'm relieved to hear that. I sure hope he's right because that certainly feels right now like what may be my last bastion of accord in Vietnam. So anyway, I want to post this video because I wanted to let the viewers know that just because you were let go from a job, that doesn't mean that you were doing a bad job. You could have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. There is such a thing as office politics. And if you get let go from a job, don't let that discourage you. I'm once again making lemonade with lemons, or a new thing I called, I'm sorry, I'm itching a lot, it's really hot. A new idiom I coined is I'm using a hurricane to put out a drought. I'm doing what Chris Cornell did after he left Soundgarden, after that band broke up, and after Zach De La Rocha left Rage Against the Machine. Chris Cornell met up with the remaining members of Rage Against the Machine, and they formed Audio Slave, who was one of my all-time favorite bands. And in my opinion, the best thing Chris Cornell ever did because they got nominated for many Grammys. Neither Soundgarden nor Rage Against the Machine ever got nominated for any Grammys. So that's that. I'm sorry for this long, drawn out video. It's longer than average. I hope everybody found this entertaining. I'm gonna try to make 3 videos every week with a new topic. A lot of it's about Asperger's, but I'm gonna mix it up every now and then. But if you are interested, please do feel free to subscribe and take care.